Yeah, my name is Joe Salvo. I'm the author of I Wiggled My Toes, Hallelujah. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and brought up in Waltham, very active in the community. I taught for 33 years. I was on the recreation board, 20 years on the recreation board as the chairman. I was in the high school and teaching accounting, law, economics. I coached softball for 20 years at Waltham High School. I did the yearbook for 3 years. And from that, we went on to Kennedy Middle School. And one day at Kennedy Middle School, it was March 11th, 1999. I was walking down the hall and I tripped, but there was nothing to trip over. So I thought it was very strange. I didn't fall, but I almost fell. From there, I went the day without a problem. And then at the end of the day, I tried to reach up to get a book. And when I tried to do that, I could feel my arm, like someone was grabbing my arm. And I said, something is wrong here. So I spent the rest of the day, that was on Thursday. Then the next day, it was fine. My arm was a little weird. So I actually went through the day, not a problem. Then I came down to the Cape. I came down to Mashpee, where I have my home. And during the weekend, there was no problem walking, but there was a problem lifting my arm up. So what I did was I went back to school, and walking up the steps to get into school, I tripped. I fell on the steps and fell down on my knees. And I said, I got to do something about this. There's definitely a problem here. So I called my primary care doctor, and he said, you got to come in and see me. So I went in to see him the next day. I said, I can't miss any school. He said, no, come after school. So I said, okay. So I went after school, and he gave me some tests where I would put my arms together and try to bring them out. And he had his hands outside my hands. And as I moved my hands, my right hand would go, my left hand would not move. It was right there. And then he put his hands inside my hands, and he said, try to push. I could push with my right, but nothing with my left. He did the same thing with my legs, and it was the same results. Nothing with my left, but it was okay with my right. And he said to me, there's a problem. And I said, do you know what it is? He says, no, I don't. He says, but you have to get an MRI. And he left the room, and then he came back, and he said, tomorrow, you have to get an MRI. I says, okay, where do I make the appointment? He said, I already did. And it's 8:30 tomorrow morning. So I thought that there was something wrong. I says, okay. So it was after school, and I hadn't called school. So I called them at the end of the day when I got home, and I told them that I wouldn't be in for the next day. I went in the morning just to make sure that I had all my lesson plans out. And I went in, and I didn't even know what an MRI was. And I said, I need an MRI. And I gave her my name, and she said, okay, sit down. And then the radiologist came out, and he says, okay, come with me. So I went with him, and I said, what is an MRI? He says, it's a machine, magnetic machine that measures everything in your body. He says, and you're in this tube, and he showed me the tube for about an hour. I said, oh, okay. So I lay down on the table. They strap your head in so that your head does not move at all. Then they put you in this machine, the MRI tube. And it's very uncomfortable. So anyways, I was there for the hour. He took me out. He says, you can't move. I said, okay. He took me out, and then he brought me into this other room, and he says, wait here, and I'll be back in about 15 minutes. He brought my scan, and he put my scan on the wall, and he said, do you see this black thing? I said, yes. He said, that's a brain tumor. He said, it's a massive brain tumor. He said, and it has to come out immediately. I said, okay, whatever you say. So he said, all right, I have a doctor who is phenomenal. He said, Dr. Peter Black. He said, he's neurosurgeon in chief of Brigham and Women's, Dana-Farber, and Children's Hospital. I said, can't get better than that. He says, let me go make an appointment. So he went in the other room, and I could hear, he said, what? I could hear a loud what? And I said, oh, that's not good. So he came back, and I said, now, how do we take this out? It's just got to be by an operation. Can't we dissolve it or anything? He says, no, no, no. He said, you have to have major, major surgery. And he said, the problem is Dr. Black's out of the country, and he's not coming back for a couple of weeks. And this has to come out immediately. I said, all right, so what do we do? He said, I have this other doctor that's pretty good. And I said, pretty good? You just told me I have to have major, major surgery and I'm going to get pretty good? He said, I should have said excellent. I said, no, you said pretty good. So anyways, he says, I'm going to make an appointment for you. Here's the number, here's the name of the guy and the address. I said, okay. So that was for the next day. So I actually did go in to see him. And like he said, he was only pretty good. He knew his stuff, but he was like, bing, bing, bing. He was rote. Everything was rote, you know, and no friendliness, no nothing. And I says, I can't do this. He said, because this has to come out immediately. So I said, what am I going to do? And I brought a friend of mine with me, and she took all the notes. She said, you know what? Call the hospital, tell them you want a second opinion. I said, okay. So I called the hospital, Brigham and Women's I was going to. And I said, I need a second opinion. And they said, okay, we'll find out, you know, what we can do. But then in the meantime, I thought, Kathy Mulcahy, a friend of mine, last year had a brain tumor and had it operated on. And I said, why don't I give her a call to see who she had? So I called Kathy Mulcahy and I said, Kathy, who did you have for a doctor? She said, Joe, I had the best in the world. I said, who's that? She said, Dr. Black. I said, Kathy, unfortunately, he's out of the country and he's not coming back for a couple of weeks. She said, no. I said, what do you mean, no? She said, I called just a little while ago because I have my yearly scan is coming up and I have to go see him and I have to have my MRI. She says, he's coming back. He has emergency surgery on one of his former patients. I said, wow. So talk about timing. 1 year to the day, she had called and he was to be told he was coming back. So anyways, I says, okay, I got to give him a call. So I called his office and they says, yeah, he'll be back. So I made an appointment. This was a Friday. I made an appointment for a Tuesday. I said, okay, this is going to work. So I went in and saw him. The primary care doctor said, you have to get 3 MRIs. So I had already had one. Over the weekend, I had a second one. The second one I went to, the guy was about 250 pounds, about 6'3", and he wasn't having a good day. He said to me, this is going to take 1 hour and 10 minutes. If you move more than an inch, we got to start over. Just like that. And I said, oh my goodness. I couldn't move because I was so scared. So I got that second MRI. That Sunday, I got my third MRI. And anyways, I went and I had the appointment set for Tuesday with Dr. Black. So I went to see Dr. Black, the nicest, kindest, sweetest gentleman you have ever met in your entire life. And I brought Ann. She was my confidant who was going to take notes. And we walked in and Dr. Black said, Joe, Ann, if you need 10 minutes, I will give you 10 minutes. If you need 3 hours, we will sit here for 3 hours. I want you to be comfortable with me and with what's going on. He said, but you have a massive tumor which has to come out immediately, he said. I said, okay. So he talked about everything that he was going to do, kind of the same as the guy who was pretty good, but he was very nice about it. So he spoke of 45 minutes and he says, here's the problem. I said, uh-oh. He said, I knew it had to come out immediately. He said, so I checked to see when it could be operated on. He said, there's no operating tables available within the next week, and this has to come out immediately. He says, you know what? Let me go check. So he left. He went in to check. I said my prayers. He came back and he said, Joe, he said, this never happens. Someone canceled. In that 45 minutes, someone canceled. He said, so I said, when is it? He said, tomorrow. I said, I'll take it. You don't want to talk? No, I don't want to talk about anything. I want to get this taken care of. He said, okay. So I went home knowing that I had the best in the world. My mom was cleaning her refrigerator and I wasn't even thinking because she was a little elderly, and to her, having a brain tumor, I think, meant like death. So anyways, she says, what did the doctor say? And I said, the doctor says I have a massive brain tumor. Well, she was cleaning the refrigerator. She grabbed the handle. She almost fell, started crying. I grabbed a chair and she sat in the chair and she said, what? And I just said, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get a brain tumor, Mom. It just happened. So we got through that. And after a while, she settled down. Now, they told me I had to have 3 MRIs. That night at 9 o'clock, they called me up and they said, Joe, you got to come in for another MRI. I said, another one? They told me 3. And the person on the phone said, I don't know who you're praying to, but just today, they came out with the 3D MRI, the first time ever. They said, and this will help Dr. Black tremendously. I said, wow, that's phenomenal. So anyways, I went to bed, got up the next day. We had to be in there by 4. My brother took me in. My sister was there, my brother-in-law, my mom. They were all there. And they said, okay. And they started putting me out. And Ann was with me. And they're wheeling me into the operating room. And she says, okay, Ann, you can go now. And I said, ho, before you go, Ann. I says, you know, I never take off from school. I says, I have 300 sick days. I said, so if after the operation, I'm on life support, I says, you take out a calendar and you count 300 days. And then after that, you pull the plug and say, goodbye, Joe. I says, because for 300 days, the checks are going to be coming in. I said, and the nurse said, Joe, do you realize that you're having a major operation? You haven't had that much intravenous to know that what's going on. Do you know what's going on? I said, absolutely. She says, how can you tell jokes? I said, nurse, if I cry and get upset, will that help me? She said, not at all. I said, then I'm going to smile and take it happily. She said, what an attitude. I said, well, that's the way I was brought up. So anyways, they brought me into the operating room and I could hear Dr. Black coming in and saying, what's everyone laughing about? And after that, everything went dark. I actually came out of the operation totally paralyzed on my left side, partially paralyzed on my right. There was nerve damage. The brain had moved over so far that I couldn't move. So what happened was I went into a psychosis that night. If you're not familiar with the psychosis, it's a bad trip on the drugs that they were giving me, which Dr. Black said you have a 1% chance of going into a psychosis. So anyways, during the night, I just tried to turn over. Couldn't do it. Couldn't move at all. Couldn't move anything. So when I did finally turn over, I could see on the side my wheelchair. So what happened was, your insides are burning. You just don't want to be on this earth. I threw all the towel, anything I could reach, the sheets, the pillows, anything that was there, I threw it off the bed. From there, it took me 5 hours to turn over and to see my wheelchair and to pull myself off the bed into the wheelchair. I didn't want to live. I went and landed in the wheelchair. Now there was blood everywhere. This is the first night that I was actually out of the operation. Blood was everywhere. And I, with my strength, little strength that I had, I wheeled myself over to the window on the 10th floor of the Brigham Women's to try to open it to jump. You're in a situation where you do not want to live. You want to get out of this world. So anyways, I started yelling and screaming. The nurse came in and she says, "What are you doing?" I told her, "I don't want to live. I don't want to live like this." She says, "I don't know what's happening." So she called another nurse. They took me and they brought me back into bed. And she says, "You know, we're going to have to strap you down," which is the worst thing in the world. You want to be out in the middle of an ocean. And she says, "We have to strap." I said, no, you can't strap me down. So another nurse came in and she said, "What's the problem?" Her name was Bonnie Mansher. I said, "Bonnie, they're going to strap me down. I don't want to. I will die." She said, "No, Joe, I'll make sure that they don't strap you down." I says, "Okay." So I said, "Bonnie, will you write your name on a piece of paper so I know who you are, so in case I need you?" She says, "Absolutely." So she did. We made it through that. The next day, Dr. Black came in actually later that night and says he's on steroid psychosis. So he has to come down slowly on the Decadron from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, and then he'll be fine. But it's going to take weeks. Knowing that I was going to get out of this, I said, okay, you know, I could do this. So anyways, I slowly came out and we kept going back and forth to the hospital MRI. I had to get an MRI right in the hospital. And after that, they said, okay, you need PT, you need physical therapy. I was gaining a little strength back on the left side. The right side was getting a little stronger. They said, I was in there for 6 days. They said, "You're going to physical therapy, Wingate at Brighton tomorrow." I said, "Perfect." So anyways, they took me to Wingate at Brighton. There was the doctor. We had a meeting, the doctor, the head nurse, PT, OT, my sister, my mother, and we were there and they all said their spiel. And they said, "Joe, you have any questions?" I says, "Yeah." "When will I walk?" Nobody said a word. And the doctor, after a few minutes, which seemed like an hour, said, "Joe, you have an uphill battle." I said, "Well, I will fight and I will work every waking moment." And he said, "Well, that's good." So the next day, I said to the nurse, I said, "Can you ask the doctor, tell him I'd like to see him?" She said, "Sure." So he came in after about 45 minutes and I said, "Doctor, what did you mean I have an uphill battle? What does that mean?" He said, now I was 47 at the time. He says, "I believe when you're 60 years old, you should be able to walk with a walker." And I said, "Doctor, no way." I said, "I will walk out of this rehab home." He said, "Joe, this is all I do. It's never been done." He said, "You have nerve damage. Your brain had moved over so far. You got to retrain everything." He said, "I'm sorry, but it won't happen." I said, "I will do this, doctor." So the next day I had PT and OT. The OT, I didn't even know what OT was until I asked. And so anyways, she brought me downstairs to a kitchen. And she says, "Okay, now I could wheel myself a little bit now with the wheelchair." I was getting a little stronger. And she says, "Okay, go over to the refrigerator. Open the refrigerator. Okay, grab the orange juice. take out the orange juice. Lock your wheelchair. Unlock it now. Okay, go over to the counter. Put it on the counter. Okay, now we got to get a glass, she said. So go to the cupboard. She said, are your cupboards in your house low? I said, yes. She says, okay, great. All right, open the cupboard, grab a glass, unlock the wheelchair, go over to the counter, put it next to the orange juice. She says, okay, now this is going to be difficult because you can only use your right arm. I said, that's okay. I said, why are you showing me this? She says, Joe, if you want any quality of life for the rest of your life, she said, this is what you'll be doing. And I says, you know what? You're nuts. I said, you are nuts. I said, I will walk out of this rehab home. She said, Joe, this is all I do. She said, this is it. She said, nobody in your situation has ever walked out of this rehab home. I said, I will walk out of this rehab home and I will drop a glass of orange juice on your desk before I leave. So after a couple days, I started taking steps. Now, when I say steps, I'm talking about an inch with my left foot and a couple inches with my right foot, my right leg. So it got a little stronger each day, and I was working every single day. I had PT and OT an hour each day, and other than that, I was also working on my own. So after a week, it was like 2 inches which was incredible. I could move my left leg 2 inches. So anyways, they saw that I was getting a little better. And PT took me downstairs and worked me on the parallel bars so that I started working on the parallel bars. So after a week and a half, I had to have radiation. So I went to the radiologist, and now I was walking a little bit better. I had gone from the wheelchair, and now I was walking with a walker at times. And he said, Joe, I called the rehab home. They said you're walking. I says, yes, Dr. Leffler, I am. He says, this is a miracle. He said, hold on here. So he went out and he brought his nurse in. And he said, Joe, will you walk for me? So I walked. I took about 10 steps, turned around, 10 steps, sat back in my wheelchair. The only thing I could think of at the time was Jesus saying to the crippled man, get up and walk, get up and walk. And he looked at the nurse and he said, you have witnessed a miracle. He said, this is physically and medically impossible. He says, he should not be doing this. And I said, doctor, I work from when I wake up until when I go to sleep. Joe, it doesn't matter. He said, with what you had, this is a miracle. I said, well, thank you. He said, whatever you're doing, keep doing. So I went back to the rehab home. Now my Decadron, we're taking it down from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2. So the nurses were keeping track. So the nurse came in, I was on 3. Now, Dr. Black said, if you switch at all, you're going back into a psychosis. So you got to be careful. You got to do it in sequence. I said, okay. So she went from 3 to 1. And I said, nurse, I'm supposed to be on 2. She said, no, you're supposed to be on 1. I said, nurse, I know I'm supposed to take 2. She said, no, Joe, 1. I said, please call the head nurse. Head nurse comes in. I said to the head nurse, I said, Dr. Black told me if I don't follow this protocol, I'm going back into a psychosis, I said. And she's got me on 1, and it's supposed to be 2, she said. I said, can you check? She went out and checked and came back with the second pill. And she says, he's supposed to be on 2. She says, you could have put him back into a psychosis. She says, how did you ever come up with 1? She said, I think I subtracted 2 from 3 and got 1. And we both said, that makes no sense. The nurse says, I want to see you in my office after this. So anyways, you got to be an advocate for yourself. And I found this out very early. So, yeah. So anyways, I did that. Now I went from the wheelchair to the walker. And now they saw that I was walking. And the head nurse, after I came back from Dr. Leffler's office, wasn't there. And she came in on that Monday, because she was out on Friday, and said, Joe, they told me you're walking. I says, I am. She said, will you walk for me? I says, yes. So I only took about 5 steps, came back and sat back on my bed now. And she said, Joe, this is a miracle. I said, well, thank you, but I'm working all the time. She said, Joe, I have never seen anyone do this after a couple weeks. I said, well, I'm doing it. She says, well, keep up the good work. Now, after that, every day, I had nurses coming in and taking notes to say, how did you do this? How is this happening? What do you do? And I'd never even questioned them as to why they were doing it. Oh, I thought that was protocol. I had never been in a rehab home before, and I thought, this is strange. Every day, the nurses came in. Now, after that, I went to a 4-legged cane, and I went to a regular cane. Now, we were writing all of this information down, and that's how I got the information for the book, because my sister brought in a daily journal. She says, we have to keep track every single day. And I don't think if it wasn't for that, although I remember a lot, I wouldn't have been able to write the book, to be honest with you. So anyways, I went from a 4-legged cane to a regular cane to a brace, and then I actually walked. Yep. And after 3.5 weeks, I walked out of the rehab home. My brother-in-law came to pick me up with my niece, and I said, I'm forgetting something I'm forgetting. So anyways, I said, will you wait here? Wait here. I went downstairs, went to the refrigerator, grabbed some orange juice, put it in a glass, brought it into OT and said, here's your orange juice. Tears came down from both of us. Yep. Yep. So from there, I went home. And I just worked out, and that I started writing the book 14 years after. I had counseled a few people through the brain tumor operation. And I said, I got to do something, because every person before I left, every person who told me I would not walk said to me, you have to write a book. They said, because this is impossible what you're doing. And this will be beneficial to other people. I said, okay, I will write my book. And I started 14 years after, because I was working out a lot, but I said, I saw a lot of people who were giving up. There was a guy in the rehab home. He was in a wheelchair after 10 years. He had an operation, same exact thing, meningioma tumor. And he had an operation, and I said to him, what are you doing in the wheelchair? He said, this never should have happened to me. I said, it shouldn't happen to anyone, but you gotta take care of yourself and work. He refused to work. And he was 10 years younger than me. And his tumor was the size of a nut. And for whatever reason, I think he had nerve damage. He couldn't walk. But he could have if he worked at it. And I said, you know what? I got to help other people. So I put them in the libraries. I put books in the libraries, and I got a few letters from people who read it. And just recently, my PSA is up. So I went to my urologist. And the urologist said, your prostate numbers are up. He says, so we just got to follow this. I said, okay. So he says, so I want to see you in 5 months. I said, okay, that was December. So I went back in May. I signed the book over to him, gave it to him. And he said, Joe, he said, your numbers have come down. He said, this is very good. He said, when I leave here, he said, there's someone who would like to speak with you. And I said, great. I didn't know what he was talking about. So anyways, this girl comes in. She's like 35. It's his nurse. And I could tell by her speech, she had a problem. So anyway, she said, Mr. Salvo? I said, yes. She said, you saved my life. I said, I did what? She said, you saved my life. I said, and how did I do that? She said, I had 3 mini strokes in my head and I was left paralyzed on my left side. She said, and I couldn't do anything. I didn't want to do anything. I was depressed. I just spent the day in my bed, she said, and thought that this is what I was going to be like this the rest of my life. And the doctor came in to see me and he said, here, read this book. She said, and I read your book and I was so impressed at what you did and the way you got yourself back into society and back into this world, and said, I can do this, she said. And now it's 3 months and I'm back to work, she said. And I don't think she meant that I saved her life as far as life or death. I think she meant that I saved her life as how she perceived to live her life for the rest of her life. So I think it's inspirational. There's so many different things. Dr. Black, he wrote my foreword actually. Amazing man, as I said before, and he wrote a great foreword. And I'm still in contact with him. You know, we still go back and forth to each other, emails and talking once in a while. And he did a great job. And I just want to, my goal now isn't for people to just read the book. My goal is to help people and have them call me up. You know, anyone that wants my card, I'll leave it in the library. And because there's people on Zoom here, I'll leave it in the library and you can pick it up and you can take, people in the audience can take it right now. And if you know of anyone that needs help, give them my card and tell them to give me a call. And hopefully they'll call me and hopefully I can help them. But I think I can. There's so many things that went along and took place, from someone canceling the operation to getting a 4th MRI, calling Kathy on that day to know that Dr. Black came back. All those things came in and I've been told I'm a miracle. And I don't know if I'm a miracle, but God was on my side. I know that. So I just want you to take the card, and if anyone needs any help with anything, give them my card, give them my number, and that's it. And that I thank you. Take care. Just finished.